Good afternoon. Today's Wednesday, April 6, 2022, and I am Brenda Stone-Cipher, calling to order the Budget and Finance Committee meeting for the Everett City Council. Do we take roll at these meetings, Susie?
Not generally, but okay. I can see that the committee members are all in attendance.
I see we're all in attendance as well as others. Thank you everyone for being here. We have a couple items on our agenda. We're going to talk about the budget development calendar, and then Susie has some information for us about revenue and a discussion that we will have related to that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Susie Haugen, the finance director for the city.
Well, thank you very much. So I think what I will do right now is share my screen, and I think that will make things a little easier. Okay, so what we have before you is a draft budget calendar. This gives us a roadmap to plan our year for developing the 2023 budget. There are some required dates that for certain items on the calendar that we have to meet, but other than that, this is more of a roadmap. So if the budget committee sees the need for adding additional items or some different discussions over the course of the budget development, we can certainly do that. But starting right at the top, we've already had our March 9 budget committee, and so that date is passed, and we did have that meeting.
Excuse me, Susie?
Yes.
Could we have the full screen of the presentation?
Oh, pardon me.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, we are now tonight will be the second reading of budget amendment number 1, and that will have a third and final reading on April 13th. Also tonight we are having our budget committee with we're discussing the budget development calendar and the revenue discussion. On April 20th, it's our intent to have a discussion to review the budget priorities. There's no big changes that we're recommending there. That this is simply a best practice for council to take a look at the budget priorities every year and just reaffirm that those are indeed still our priorities. We'll also have additional revenue discussion at that date. And hopefully on May 4th, we'll be ready for a council briefing. We'll start with this would be full council. And we'll start with the 6-year forecast overview, bringing forward any changes we may have made in that. There's not likely to be a great deal of changes between now and then. And then we'll have the revenue discussion based on these next couple of budget committee meetings with full council. We also plan to bring forward another budget amendment, and this one is likely to be focused on a couple of ARPA projects, so we can get some of those going. And so those readings would be on May 4th, 11th, and 18th, at least at this time. You may consider that sort of a placeholder. Also on May 4th, we have a budget committee before full council, and we would be again talking revenues, as we will again on May 18th. And another full council briefing on May 18th based on the results of the budget committee meeting. Then on June 1st, we hope to wrap up those discussions and with budget committee and either move forward or not with a plan for new revenue. On July 6th, we have a budget committee meeting, and our intent is to do a full reserve review with budget committee, all of the CIPs and our other reserve funds as well. We also want to talk about at the same time our support of the public facilities district and go over its capital plan, and also an update on real estate excise tax and how that's coming in. Those items are all tightly bound together because many of a couple of our CIPs are funded with real estate excise tax dollars, and so is our PFD support and the debt that we pay on their behalf. On August 3rd at Budget Committee, we would provide the full revenue forecast update. We do the majority of that work in July. We will also go over the June to June CPI, how that came in. And as everybody knows, inflation has been extraordinary this year. So we do not anticipate having good numbers come out for the June to June. We'll also go over the street and alley vacation funded projects and perhaps have somebody in from Parks or Public Works to talk about those in more detail. On September 7th, we plan to have a lodging tax update, let you know how those numbers are coming in and what we see going out in the future. Also an update on health benefits and the performance of our health benefits program and what our premiums and funding rates are coming in at for 2023. And then also an update on the proposed budget. We have budget amendment number 3 scheduled for at this time for September 21, 28, and October 5th for the 3 readings. That is generally, it's a amendment that would incorporate things that have happened since the second amendment, any grants we've received. We also use that amendment to allocate the budgeted vacancies where they've actually occurred throughout the departments. The mayor plans to present her budget message on September 21st, and I would also be doing the required revenue and expenditure workshop and public hearing on that date. October 5th Budget Committee, we've got just time set aside. We don't have specific items planned for that, potential topics planned for that date yet, but can certainly add anything that the committee is interested in seeing. On November 2nd, 9th, and 16th, we're looking at the adoption of the 2023, excuse me, we've got a bad date there, I can see, property tax ordinance for 23 taxes. So it's our 22 ordinance for 23 taxes. November 2nd, we have another date set aside for a budget committee, which the topics are to be determined. And then the public hearings would start on the proposed budget on November 16th, 23rd, and 30th. We will have department heads available at the first hearing for questions. And of course, we'll bring back anybody to subsequent hearings if there's follow-up questions for them. Concurrent with the budget hearings, we'll have the readings of the budget ordinance. And on November 30th, December 7th, and December 14th, we'll wrap up the year with budget amendment number 4, which will be the final cleanup on any items that we need to take care of before year end. And that concludes the budget calendar. Is there any questions, any comments, any other additional items you would like to see added?
I have a question, if I can jump in. Is that all right, President?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please go ahead. Judy.
So I am assuming that, we have a series in a row of the revenue discussions that the possible levy lift is in that section. Yes. Is there you must have a mapped out kind of a timeline if how that would happen. I'm just curious what that timeline might look like.
Yeah, I have a high level timeline that let me find my share screen again, that I can share. And my mouse control again. Okay, so this is a timeline that I shared a little earlier in the year. And so we've highlighted January through May for council to have workshops and briefings regarding the potential lid lifts and to, that would address the structural deficit to maintain court services. We would need to have the ballot measure and ordinance drafted in June, and the first reading of the ordinance no later than June 29th. The reason why we need it no later than June 29th is that we need to have it in effect and ready to submit to Snohomish County no later than August 2nd. So, we have 3 readings, so that's 3 weeks, and then 15 days for the ordinance to be in effect. So that's kind of the latest possible dates. And then November 8th would be the vote.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Councilman Schwab?
Yes, I guess this kind of goes along, and I guess we perhaps maybe to start the discussion here. Thanks, Councilmember Judy. I guess my my thought process goes along about perhaps a structured process where we talk about the various options when it comes to a levy lid lift ordinance. I guess perhaps on behalf of on the work that the staff does, perhaps maybe you've already considered it. For example, this meeting, or whatever date, you would have some different options and what the revenue would generate for each one, and then perhaps I guess just structure the presentation of dealing with a potential ordinance. Not the timeline for you and your staff to do the preparation, because I know this is a lot of work on your behalf.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting into the next topic, but the way that we're envisioning this at this time is tonight we're going to talk in more general terms, and hopefully understand whether or not the committee supports going forward with a lid lift request. And then on April 20th, if it's the council's wish to do so, I would bring back a financial model that we could put some assumptions in, and the council and committee members could look at the various outcomes by different sizes of lifts, and what the outcome would be both on the budget and the forecast going forward, as well as income or impact on an average homeowner. And so we would look to do that at the next committee meeting.
Well, and there's obviously various ways to organize a levy lid, structure it. So I guess where do you think those conversations, is it something that your staff would prefer to start and bring options to the table? We talked about this before in other conversations about what potential other cities do, other jurisdictions, some examples. I mean, I'm just thinking there should be a starting point, and how that starting point would be processed. I don't want to get too administrative on us, but at some point we kind of need to start and say, okay, these are the 3 types of potential ordinances that we want to look at, or 4 or 5. Where's the starting point on this?
So, we have been actually talking about this for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
There are 4 basic options that you can choose to do a levy lid lift. You can do a one-time permanent lift, where you lift the lid in the first year and then you just grow at 1% per year thereafter. You can do a 1-year temporary, where you do the initial bump and grow at 1% off of that until at the 7th year, at which point that lift drops back and your levy is at the point it would have been had you not done the lift. There's also a multi-year permanent lift, where you can lift the lid by predetermined amounts each year for the next 6 years. And then after that point, it just grows at 1% after that. And then again, a multi-year temporary, where you have the same thing as the one-time temporary, where it drops off the cliff after the at the 7th year.
Yeah.
So, after really looking at these options, it is our recommendation to go with the one-time permanent for a couple of reasons. The permanent lift is because it would be pretty disastrous for the city to be able to get a lid lift and then in the 7th year have it have the rug pulled out from under our finances that way. That would be not something that I would ever recommend that we pursue. It's going to be a lot of work, a lot of effort to get a lid lift passed, and to do it on a temporary basis doesn't really seem to be a practical solution for the city's finances, because our problem is not a temporary nature. It's persistent because of the 1% limit on property tax. And the reason why we are recommending the one-time permanent as opposed to a multi-year is we believe it's just a lot easier to talk about and a lot easier for our taxpayers to understand what's happening, as opposed to raising it by different amounts in each successive year. So that is our recommendation, is the one-time permanent, but we can certainly, I can bring back on April 20th additional information about all of those options if we want to dive into that a little deeper.
I think that if we're going to really consider this, that we do need to do the dig deep into this. And with those different scenarios, Susie, I would like to see what the average cost increase would be per homeowner. If you can, kind of work out that number to show maybe what the different scenarios might be and what that's really going to cost to our taxpayers.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, that is already my intent, is on the 20th to bring back a model that will show you, based on various choices made in terms of a lift, what the impact would be on the city's budget as well as on a average homeowner.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, that would be what I would need to look at. So thank you for working on that already.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're close. We should get a final worksheet on our assessed value next week from the county. And so with that, I'll update our assessed value in the model and should be pretty much ready to go.
Great. That was the bulk of my questions. I just want to, because that seems to be a looming huge deal for us this year, and one way or another. And so to be able to understand when we're going to really be evaluating it is really great. Thank you.
So I had another comment on the subject. And that was the disbursement model for the increase in taxes. I know I'm assuming that's going to be part of your proposals. And we're going to do that in the 20th, and that becomes a little bit more. That's probably when we need to, always need to get our larger group involved. But that's there's a lot of decision making and strategic process when it comes to disbursement of additional revenue.
Absolutely. And at this time, it is our recommendation that we use the additional revenue to maintain the services we are currently delivering. You know, it's, we have been working, we've been talking about and working really hard to resolve the city's structural deficit for years. We've improved efficiencies. We've through reorganizations, and we've leveraged technology and modified our processes. And at least twice we've solicited ideas from staff and from the public to cut costs or improve revenues. I think one in 2014 and one in 2018. Just recently, we've established public and private partnerships to deliver quality of life programs that we couldn't afford to fund any longer. And as everybody knows, we ultimately reduced staffing and services reluctantly, very reluctantly so. And, you know, at the same time, our responsibilities and the needs in the community have continued to grow. The effects of the pandemic significantly increased the level of chronic homelessness and the behavioral health concerns in Everett, just as they have everywhere in the region. And responding to these issues, as you also know, have required new investments in housing and outreach with our social workers and enforcement, and that's further strained the budget. You know, we've really pursued every avenue that we can think of to control costs over the last several years. But it's just not possible or even really reasonable to believe that we can continue to deliver the public services at our current levels when the growth of nearly 1/3 of our general government revenues is restricted to 1% per year. And as we just talked about a little earlier, periods of high inflation like we're experiencing right now make the situation even more insupportable. You know, one point that I want to make also relative to this is that, you know, if we do, because of the 1% limit, requesting voters of one lid lift and thinking that will just solve the problem. It will solve the problem temporarily, but I think that it's important to also acknowledge that much like EMS levies, we'll probably have to go back to voters periodically in order to ask for an additional lift, because over time with the 1% limit, our resources are going to fail to meet the rising cost of providing these public services. So I think that that's a really important point to make. And, you know, unlike a lot of other cities, as Councilmember Schwab mentioned, you know, other cities have done lids, and what have they done? But Everett hasn't asked the community for any financial relief since the 1% limit went into place back in the early 2000s, other than EMS levies. And, you know, as you pointed out, there are a number of decisions for council to make relative to a lid lift ballot measure, and most notably the size of the lift and how the city will deploy the additional revenue. So, you know, again, in order to minimize the impacts on taxpayers, it's our recommendation to focus on maintaining existing services so that we don't have to continually erode services year over year, or continue to have yet another year of costly and unsustainable deferrals of maintenance and contributions to our long-term liabilities. So, you know, I think that important to this meeting is getting a sense from the committee as to whether you support seeking a levy lid lift from voters, having voters tell us what level of services they're willing to support, that'll be a very important outcome of this committee meeting. And then as you think about a possible lid lift over the next couple of weeks before our next meeting, and we start digging into the numbers, is, what level of, or what do you want this lid lift to support? Do you want to focus on maintaining what we're delivering now? Is there something that you want to do differently? And then also, how many years do you want this lift to cover in terms of the budget, so that we wouldn't have to cut services or ask for another lift? That will really go to what size of lift we will need. And that'll become much more clear to you as we go through the modeling work. But that would be something for the committee to consider over the next couple of weeks. So hopefully, because there is much work to be done, and we do need to move this process forward. If it's the committee's desire to do that, that we would be prepared to brief the full council on May 4th of some level of recommendations regarding a lid lift.
Well, Susie, I know you're kind of looking, I mean, I think that for me, I would say I'm very interested in looking at these numbers. And, you and I met earlier today, and subsequent to that time, I went back and looked at our Burke study that we had done. I can't remember when it was. Let me look at the date. This is actually in October of 2018. So I recognize that some things may have changed by then. But there are a couple things in the study that I wanted to just touch base with as we're looking at this levy lid lift. There were also some other revenue recommendations that were contained within the Burke study. And I can't remember if we have acted on them or not. The first thing that I think was raised in the study was it talked about the city's B&O taxes, and noted that we are one of the few cities of the comparison group that has the same B&O tax rate across all industries. Of course, I know we have this extra kind of break in taxes for aerospace, but that's at the very high end level. But it noted that most cities have a differential tax rates for different industries. And so I'm just wondering, have we looked at making any changes in those B&O tax rates to mimic what other cities are doing? I don't know what the differences are.
There's a pretty broad array of choices that other cities have made. And it's true that there is differences among the tax rates for different classifications of industries. And if you'll recall, last fall, we passed a B&O tax ordinance that extended that lower tax rate for any classification that those gross proceeds requirement, which, is quite a threshold. Mm-hmm. So, we've talked about this before, and in the past, there has not been, from what I've gleaned from council, there has not been a real interest in changing the, tax rates for different classifications.
Well, I think as we're thinking about going to the voters for, to pick up the slack, I'm wondering if we should look again at other revenue generating options and see if there's any. I don't even know if how much additional revenue this type of thing could result in. If you change tax rates, does it just change what people pay from one industry to another without any net tax increase? But I do like to think about how we could sort of share the burden of making this budget work for our city. There was also another there was a statement made with regard to utility taxes, that we don't levy taxes on water, sewer, and stormwater utilities.
That's not really accurate.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought we had a tax on those. Okay.
It's 6% in the same as all the other utility taxes. It's a payment in lieu of tax, but it is essentially still a utility tax.
It's still a tax. Okay, great. And then the other thing that came up was just impact fees. And I know we've looked at the parks impact fees, and I do believe we went through subsequent to the SPERC study and looked at a lot of our permitting fees and kind of got those up to date. But I'm just wondering again, if as an optics and also an actual practical measure, if there are reasons for us to consider, some other changes in rates and taxes just to go along with this, again, just to not put the full burden of balancing the city's budget on the property owners within the community.
Well, we have in the recent past couple of years actually been through those. As far as the impact fees, we just increased our traffic mitigation fees. We also implemented the park impact fees, which will be being phased in over the next couple of years. Our permitting fees, many of them have been revised, and I think that they're looking at doing that again. We've also implemented the fire marshal's plan review fee is new, as well as a fee for when they actually go out and inspect buildings. We've implemented a false alarm fee.
Yeah.
And I actually, I haven't updated it for about a year, but I do have a report that I prepared that kind of goes over all of our fees and where they are at relative to being current.
Yeah.
And most of them are pretty current now because we've done a lot of work on that since I think we really first dug in maybe 2014. During that time period, you probably remember. And so there's a
process.
Lot of work done towards that since then.
That would be, if you could share that report. I think even as we just sort of start to get ready for this, conversation with our community about a levy lid lift, it might be helpful to have that information at our disposal about, all of the other the other elements and stakeholders in our community who are paying a bigger portion of the tax burden. So that could be helpful.
Absolutely, I can get that out to you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Yes. Hi.
Okay, Councilman Schwab.
Thank you. I guess one of the comments, and I know I've thought this before, this is an ambitious timeline, and we're and I know that's why we're adding committee meetings, and I appreciate that, and I know it's a lot of work for city staff, but this is a pretty ambitious schedule, and I know it has a significant impact if we don't put it on the November ballot. Because of the way the state law works, we wouldn't be able to, we'd have to wait a full year to recover the property tax from real property. So we definitely need to do a lot of heavy lifting. I think one thing that I'd like to work on as we move forward pretty quickly, and that is, and I know it's part of the plan, but the projected deficit. I really do think we need to look at to answer the question, what if we do nothing? What are we going to cut? I think that's an important aspect of the conversations. And I think for many years, and I've said this before, city administration and previous councils have done a good job insulating the taxpayers from the problem by continuing to cut and reduce our capital improvement projects. And now we're to the point where the deviation is very large. So I really do think we ought to consider, I think we owe it to the other council members and the public that we be upfront and say, okay, well, we have insulated this process as much as we can. Now we're going to have to make some true cuts. In essence, we really have through our capital improvement projects. I think I could make the argument the city could be more streamlined and more efficient, especially when it comes to our plan development, if we would have had more staffing. So I think indirectly that we are feeling some of the cuts, maybe some in public safety. You know, a lot of these things are hard to have instant results or instant repercussions. A lot of times they're long-term. So I really do think we should be ready to say, okay, if we're not ready to go forward with this, then we need to look at the hard choices also. We just need to have a conversation about some of the consequences that we're in. Instead of working and, you know, kicking the can down the road per se. I think we're at this point, we're here. And now you have what did Quincy have? 4 new council members that are kind of dealing with this. And I don't mean to be too critical of the past. I know everyone's trying to do their best, do what they can to keep taxes down. But we're really at a big crossroads here. So I think part of the conversation needs to be, okay, what things that we're going to have to cut if we move forward without a levy lid lift. I also want to be able to address to our neighbors and our community members, whenever there's a tax increase, there are going to be some in our community that say, well, what do I get? What are you going to add? What services are you going to increase? It's a difficult task to keep the building in place versus having a tax increase to add something to the services versus just trying to maintain. So I think we should be prepared in a responsible way, not saying we wouldn't, to be prepared to answer to our community, okay, maybe there are some things that, I mean, there's 7 of us and a mayor staff. It's difficult to say to me that we're just going to just keep services maintained. I mean, I don't know if this group can do that. I don't know if any group does that. There's got to be at some point where we're going to look at our priorities, and perhaps we, instead of adding services, we're just going to bring back services some services in the past and some were not. So those are going to be some tough decisions, and I'd really like to land collectively on some of those questions as we go forward. Sorry, that was a mouthful.
Thank you. Well, I think I agree that it's going to be a hard sell to just say we won't cut anymore. I mean, that's going to be very difficult. But I know that we have talked about doing a community survey, and so kind of asking our community about priorities and what they would like to see happen with this. What are they expecting of us as we think about how to balance the budget for next year? What's the timeline on that survey? And
so I'd like to kind of punt that until Nick is back next week.
Okay, sure.
We are still talking about that in administration and need to bring council members in to that conversation. I think we share the value in doing some of that work soon. So I suspect we're talking over the next month or so, month to 6 weeks. It would make sense to be doing that work so that we do have a collective sense of where the community is with
Yeah.
needs.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to go out and ask for something when you're not really quite sure what what the collective community is thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe when Nick gets back, we can get an update on
Mhm.
what the timeline for that is, because it'll take some time to get out and collect and analyze, and that may be an important input for the council decision on, whether and when to move forward.
Right. And yeah, we recognize that as well. You bet.
Mhm.
Especially if there are different levels of levy lifts, so that we could maybe accommodate something that the community really wants, even if it's not in the annual budget, that kind of thing, or not, but I think Councilmember Schwab was right in that we need to have potential cuts if we move forward with this. What are the potential cuts if we do not have the levy lid lift? Because I think we need to show both sides of it, and to get people to understand why the need is there. So
Yeah, and Councilmember, I would add that given the uncertain nature of this whole process, we are going to have to develop two budgets. We'll develop two budgets provided council does determine to go forward. If we don't go forward, then we'll have one budget, but
got it. Yeah.
we would need to have two budgets, one that was built based on a successful lid lift, and one that is built based on no lid lift.
Got it. That's a great, and that will tell us exactly what we need to know.
Mhm.
And of course, we would definitely be needing input from this committee and the rest of the council into what, in the event of an unsuccessful lid lift or no attempt at a lid lift, where you would like to see the cuts.
Got it. Thank you, Susie.
Yeah.
So in essence, Susie, you would probably are working on that project now, because even if we go forward with it, you're still going to have a plan B.
Yes.
So that work we can use as a dual role to also to educate the public, to say, well, this is the budget we're going to go forward with this time, unless the levy or whatever the process passes, if that's we choose to do so, which I think we're heading that direction, at least considering that option at this point. So some of that work will be done then, in essence.
Yes, we will have to have two budgets in place so that we're ready either way.
Mhm.
Because, with the legal deadlines that we have for appropriating funds for the coming year, there's not a lot of time.
Mhm.
Once you get to November, you're pretty much on the train and you have to move forward. I mean, that doesn't mean to say that whatever budget is adopted for 2023 in November of this year can't be changed next year, because as you all know, we do budget amendments throughout the year. But we have to have an original budget in place and in effect on January 1st.
Mhm. Well, I guess my last comment here is that thank you for putting together the calendar. I know it's standard, but I know you and your staff put a lot of work into it, so thank you. And I think at this point, we certainly need to move forward with at least considering the levy lid possibility. And that was one of the questions, my intention, that you were kind of getting direction from us.
Yes, I was hoping this week at this meeting to get an indication from the committee members whether or not they supported continuing down this path. Understanding that this is not full council, but
Yeah.
Certainly the work to be done by this committee would be great.
Right. And I'd certainly be in favor of that. As I just want to reinforce the fact that we're going to have to display two budgets.
Yes.
And so we can make some educated decisions on going forward. So thank you.
And
Yeah, and I
Susie,
think-
I'm
go ahead.
definitely definitely for moving forward with the investigation period of this and looking at the numbers that you almost have ready to go, and then, discussing all that, feeling comfortable with all the numbers and everything, and then presenting it to the council to also buy in on. So I think we
Yeah,
need to
and
move forward.
I concur. I think we really need to do that. Because ultimately we have to get this before, if it's to be considered, it's really the taxpayers who will be making this decision. We're just deciding whether to ask them to decide, really. So Susie, can you send that budget calendar out for us so that we can get all those things on our calendars, because we've got quite a few meetings coming up and some of the important deadlines. And then, like I said, I think we're all in concurrence that we need to move forward and get the work done to find out, what this would mean to our community and what it could mean to our city budget, and sort of move along with all pathways at once. I think we're marching forward pretty fast here.
Okay, so just to recap, I'm gonna send out the report on sort of the status of our fees and, the currentness of them. And I'll send out the budget calendar, and I can send out again the 4 different types of lifts that you can choose to build the ordinance around. Again, I've got to put forth my very strong recommendation to do a permanent lift. I'm not sure that it makes any sense at all to do a temporary. A temporary lift would make more sense if we were funding a particular project.
Yeah.
We were going to build with this additional revenue, and then once the project would be done, the need would be done. In terms of what we're trying to do here is we're trying to solve a persistent problem that we have, and that's the structural deficit due to the 1% limit on property tax. So again, you can choose either a one-time lift or a multiple year lift, and we can talk about that a little further. I'm hoping that you will agree with me that a permanent option is really, one or the other is really the practical answer to our problem. And also, I would add to that we have a lot to communicate to our taxpayers between now and November. And in my opinion, a one-time lift would be a much easier message to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with that, Susie. If we're going to get tax relief from our taxpayers, the problem will not go away, and getting a big hit of revenue and then having that siphon off over the course of a year or 2 or 3 or whatever that temporary measure would be, and makes no sense to me either. So I agree. But it would be helpful. I know that when we had our retreat many years ago, I'm going back in my mind, there was a wonderful memo that you wrote that just explained all of this. And so, I mean, I think if you can just resurface that piece. In fact, that whole memo was good, that really talked about all the different options. And that could be something, remember we had it was a retreat, I'm gonna say 3 or 4 years ago. Judy, you were there.
Oh, yeah.
That was pre-COVID. It was right before COVID.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was in January of 2020.
Yeah, and we just had all of the different options. I mean, library, parks, municipal parks district, the the regional fire authority. There were so many. That was such good information, and I'm sure I can get my fingers on that. So, and even if
I'm sure I have it somewhere.
Yeah, if you can find that and recirculate that, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Since we've got these new council members, they might be interested to read, because as I recall, your recommendations and conclusions, for example, with library funding was like, this just doesn't work. It doesn't really help us.
Mhm.
So those would be really good
Yeah.
reminders for all of
Yeah.
us as to how we got to where we are right now in terms of considering the levy lid lift.
Mhm.
I do hate to bury you, but I will certainly send those stuff out. It will be a lot, so
Yeah.
prepared. And then I can also send out some, I've got data on statewide ballot measures, what they were for, and what was successful. And it's, by city, by county. So if you're interested, I can send that out to the committee as well.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to see that. And does that have does it tell which ballot it was on, the primary versus the general?
I think I can get that in there. I think that's part of the data set.
Okay.
I'll try it. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I'd be curious to look at that because I have some questions about whether it makes sense to put something like this on the general election ballot. I don't know that we have any choice, but
Well, if we want to have the tax revenue in 2023 for the 23 budget, November is the last election.
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm there. Okay. All right.
So a quick question for you, our council person chair. Are you going to do a quick report?
Yes, I
Okay,
will make a
thank you. I
report.
won't say much in my comments then, just to kind of ease up the break.
Sounds good. Thank you. Is that all, Susie?
I have nothing else.
Okay. And Councilmember Schwab, do you have anything else?
I have nothing else. Thank you, Susie, for doing this. Is a lot of extra work this year, and I just appreciate it.
Well, it's very necessary work. So
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, we'll adjourn
thank you.
and see you on Zoom soon.